folks, and welcome to this post-holiday edition of Hash It Out. So Hash It Out is a podcast that we do here at Woodlawn Baptist Church where we talk about the most recent sermon that was preached, kind of use it as a jump-off point to some other things. My name's Justin Moorhead. This is Mitchell Evans. We're going to be talking to you today about Nehemiah chapter 5, because this week we return to our study in Nehemiah, and so we're going to be talking about this chapter. And the idea, if you're not familiar, is we're not going to kind of talk through each talking point of the sermon, but really just kind of think the overall theme of the sermon, maybe some things that were addressed in the sermon, how that might be something interesting, edifying to talk about, kind of as a separate issue altogether, maybe. Today, the idea being, it was answering this question. How well are other Christians or other church members loved by you? So if you're a Christian, this chapter in Nehemiah is going to kind of beg that question of you. Because what's going on there is kind of this issue of the covenant people not treating each other well, and then that needing to turn around, and there needing to be kind of a particular love there. Does that sound like a fair summary, kind of fair point? So one of the things that's happening here, and this was one of the harder things for me to kind of envision a parallel for today, so that it would be helpful to talk it out, that's going on is the covenant people are taking advantage of each other, even up to enslaving each other, charging each other interest on things. So really kind of predatory, taking advantage of type of behavior against the people that they're supposed to love the most. It made me think, tried to dream up ways in which church members, maybe within church membership, how can we tend to even take advantage of each other? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think there are like innumerable ways, that you could.
Top few, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I think in particular to the passage, what Nehemiah points out is some Jews had been enslaved, and he says, we developed this program to buy them back out of slavery. You think of antebellum South, that was going on. Some slaves had escaped to the north and would raise funds to buy a slave out of slavery and help them cross into a state that supported their freedom. So that idea was going on in Jewish culture. However, what we find in the passage is they were buying them out of slavery. Then somebody within Judaism is now got them kind of in a bad spot where they can't afford a living. They can't afford to buy grain and food. So they end up right back into slavery, but now to somebody within their own community. You think if somebody had gone to the north, antebellum South, and then end up right back in slavery. So that idea, I think if you take that to church, you help somebody get out of whatever's going on in life. They come join the church, but then they find like a pocket within the church that's kind of still doing those same things.
Yeah.
And so now you give it kind of a Christian approval. So we're going to church and we're forgiven for our sins, but we're still engaged in kind of these same sins or practices we had in the past, but it kind of gets covered over. So you took them out of slavery just to help them find a new version of slavery within the covenant community. I think that happens probably more often than even pastors like you and I would be aware of. At times I hear people say, for instance, I used to talk bad about people at work, out in church, and now I found that, there's a lot of gossip here.
Sure.
And so I think that is probably pretty prevalent on even other sins that they say, oh man, I know you've been maybe involved in that in the past, but now we know we're forgiven.
Sure.
So there's no expectation. So really you're still going to be in bondage to it. So I think that does happen in churches in a way that would fit the response of Nehemiah, where he is disgusted by it.
Sure.
How dare you go down this road? You may have it sounded like maybe you had some other thoughts on.
Yes, to some degree. I think a lot of times when somebody is initially putting their faith and trust in Christ, we know that there are a lot of kind of lifestyle sins often that get turned away from. But there is, and even a good Jerry Bridges book, Respectable Sins, isn't that what it's called?
Yes.
But I think a lot of times you can do away with the sins that kind of everybody as a whole would say, yes, clearly you've got to quit doing this, that, or the other. Only to turn to this group of people where you should find kind of ongoing encouragement towards holiness, just to find yourself entrapped in like a Christian sin, right? Like this acceptable baptized sin, if you will, of gossip, whatever, in form of prayer requests or, how that kind of thing can go. But so that's really my only thought, is that a lot of times it would take maybe some additional discernment or wisdom to see, are these people really kind of for my good in terms of my holiness and my walk with Christ? Or is it just about having a better set of sins than the ones I initially turned away from?
Yeah. You're still in bondage to it. It still
Yes.
kind of drives your life. Yeah, for sure. I do think that's can be the case. And like I said, probably even more often than I would like to admit.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So one other thing, kind of in line with the story from Nehemiah chapter 5, is they turned from that. So, and we talked a lot about repentance on Sunday. So they turned from these things. But what's being presented is a particular love that these people, God's people, are supposed to have for each other. And that love is different and even prioritized, I would say is a fair word, above other types of love. However, something that I think is going to come up in a lot of people's minds is that we're called to love our neighbor as ourselves. And who is your neighbor? I mean, this idea. So really the way that I should treat people at work, the way that I should treat my literal neighbors, the Bible instructs me as a Christian, should be loving. But now passages like this and elsewhere, John chapter 13, you pointed out on Sunday, we're told that there's a particular love that the church should have for itself. And I would even say within a particular local body, members of that church, there should be this particular love. How is that different than this other kind of love? I mean, we're called to love both of these groups, but if one is supposed to have priority, is there a tension there? Is this like a competition? How should Christians think of that?
Yes, I do think we neglect the side of it where we particularly love the people in church. And I think priority is a good word for the way the distinction would be demonstrated in our lives. So absolutely love your neighbor. Where this would cause Christianity to break even from other religions. So I'm detracting a little bit, but I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Where we break from other religions is Islam has a component to it where you should value those who are within Islam and those that are outside of Islam, infidels, if you will, that they can be treated differently. This has gotten a lot of scrutiny. So one instance of that is that those within Islam are allowed to lie to those outside of Islam. From my research, granted it's research, I've never been a Muslim, but research nonetheless. It seems to be moderate Islamic authorities, and as I'm reading within the U.S., say there are 3 times in Islam you can lie to somebody and it's permissible. So the first one, at first sounds kind of comical. A husband is allowed to lie to his wife.
Okay.
Then they'll say, but that's for her, if it's for her good. And so you immediately kind of run with what this might look like. And I think probably the most often is if it's for my good, right?
Right.
Where have you been? Oh, it's not what you think. So the second one is you are allowed to lie if it's for the good of those who you're engaged with. So the ends justify the means concept.
Yep.
It's a utilitarian concept. So you're allowed to lie in those instances, which causes a bunch of other, even philosophically, that's been debated a lot between religions. We can imagine the issues with that. The third category is, this is where moderates, the way they phrase it. You're allowed to lie in a situation of war or deceive within a situation of war. But when you go back and read the Quran, as I have recently, it doesn't actually say, that would be an extrapolation of maybe what is actually said. So what's actually said is you're allowed to lie, and I am heavily paraphrasing, but you're allowed to lie to your enemies. That's the word that gets kicked around.
Okay.
So when is somebody your enemy? So what I believe I'm reading typically are moderate Muslims within the U.S. And they'll say, well, if somebody's your enemy, that's a situation of war. Everybody says it's okay to lie in war. The U.S. uses camouflage.
Sure, yeah.
Right? We deceive people by camouflage. So obviously deception is permitted in war. And that's all this is really talking about.
Yeah.
Which may be the case. When it sounds like the passages are saying, though, is you're allowed to lie to your enemy regardless of a wartime scenario,
Sure.
you're allowed to lie to your enemy. Enemy is also, within the Quran, equated to infidel.
Okay.
So that's where I think if you read more conservative, my version of conservative Islamic groups, they blur the line. So they don't think it's just at wartime.
They're saying anybody who's not Muslim.
Right, and they will give, so it's hard to know where that lands.
Right.
I would say, at the bare minimum, Christians are fundamentally different. We don't think you're allowed to lie to your enemy. You must love your enemy.
Right.
So you don't even love just your neighbor, you even love your enemy, as Jesus says.
Sure.
So it is quite the distinction.
Right.
So Christians are in a fundamentally different place regarding our neighbor. We should always love our neighbor. Mm-hmm. However, what these passages are saying is there's a unique prioritization of somebody who's within the church. So my neighbor, in some sense, could be in the pews with me.
Right.
Or my neighbor could be in the cul-de-sac with me and doesn't have anything to do with Christianity.
Sure.
I should love both of them. But if it comes down to a scenario where I'm forced to choose, that's where it would stand out that I prioritize. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul gives this scenario. And he says, in the scenario, you've been trying to share the love of Jesus and the truth of the gospel with somebody, and they invite you over for dinner. And so you think, man, that's awesome. Yeah. I want to go. Finally, we're going to get a chance to talk about what means the most to me. And I'm going to get an opportunity to share that with them. And so I'm going over this real explicit purpose. He says, you go over. If they serve you food or drink, eat whatever it is without question.
Sure.
Because in the end, it's just food or drink. But this, of course, is Paul's culture. But he says the food might have been used in some kind of religious practice. So they cooked this meat as like a sacrifice, then served it as the meal. And he's like, but in the end, it's just meat that's been cooked.
Right.
He says, but if you take a church member with you, you're like, man, we're going to get a chance to share the gospel. Go with me. You take a church member with you. When he says, if your church member shows up and says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it for the sake of the one who informed you and for the sake of conscience. So he's saying the church member that came with you says, man, I don't feel right about eating this. So now you're in a tough spot. Do I offend the church member I'm with or offend the person I'm trying to share the gospel with?
Right.
I think our natural inclination would be offend the church member.
Right.
Eat the food. Just
Sure.
tell them it's time to buck up, Buttercup.
Sure.
And eat the food because I want to share the gospel.
Right.
Paul says, no, you side on the side of the church member.
Right.
Because my priority is there. I'm more concerned for them. So I want to be loving either way. But if it comes down to a spot where I'm forced to choose and I'm going to do something somewhat seemingly unloving possibly towards one or the other, I prioritize the person within the community of faith.
Sure.
So I think Paul's illustration there is really helpful.
Yeah.
Because he is trying to help us see, how can I love neighbor and especially love the church family? So I think many times it's going to look real similar.
Yeah.
I do something caring for somebody outside of the church. I do something caring for someone inside the church. But I should prioritize those in the church. So hopefully that helps. But I think it's very much worth saying because it really sets Christianity apart from other philosophical thoughts. And some are saying, no, you equally love everybody.
Right.
Kind of the opposite of Islam. Islam's no, you prize those in the community, and at times you can even shun those outside of the community. And so Christianity is trying to do both.
Yeah.
Love neighbor, but then especially love those in the covenant community because they're your family. And here's how to do it when there would be kind of a sticking point, if you will.
And I think with the sticking point and wanting, if you've got to offend somebody, in those situations, is certainly helpful. As you were talking, I was also thinking about something I've experienced. When you think, I want to be a friend of the world in a sense, in that I want to be for the good of the community, even evangelistic. I want to be kind of outreach oriented with certain things, whether it's like recreational sports, like in my case, I've thought in those terms a lot or whatever. And a lot of this is having to do with how you use your time. So would that same prioritization thing play in that as well, where you would say, we really need to be making sure that we're allowing for fellowship or recreational time with church family over and above other family. Do you think it plays there the same, or is that different?
Yeah, I would say you're going to do some real practical things. I'm going to look for friends in the church first. I'm going to look to help somebody. We run into some extra cash and think, man, it'd be good to really help somebody in need. Look and see if there's a need in church first. So I think that priority is going to be, I'm going to go there first. However, there are certainly times where my wife and I, for instance, have made a concerted effort, like you're saying, somebody at the ball field with the kids.
Sure.
We can engage with them. And so we want to put ourselves second to that opportunity. But we would also balance that against, well, if there's an occasion at church or with folks from church, really.
Sure.
Not at the building, but with the people of church, they get top priority.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a helpful way. There's a lot of other ways to maybe think through that other than just the prioritization category, but I think that's a helpful maybe starting place because that seems to be what Paul pulls out in 1 Corinthians 10.
Yeah. All right, last thing I've got, and we can hit it quick. Something you pointed out right before we started talking about this, that you see in Nehemiah chapter 5 is that there's several kind of complaints, several issues that are going on. Taxes was a big issue. Famine was a big issue at the time. This mistreatment of God's people against themselves, is the only issue that Nehemiah takes up and seeks to fix. And I think there's a lot of implications with that. What do you think would be just on the face of it, what's the big takeaway there?
Yeah, I think they do roll through a bunch of complaints. You're spot on. I don't make enough to feed my family. I'm getting taxed too high. It's all going to child care in Minnesota. I'm getting the third category being the people within the community are taking advantage of me. The only one he addresses, there's a fourth category, famine.
Famine, yep.
Right? So he says there's a famine in the land. He works for the king. So on the tax issue, he could have said, I'm going to go to the king and talk to him, see if we can get a reprieve for a moment.
Right.
On the famine issue, famously in the Bible, prior to Nehemiah's time, there were famines and people would pray and God would alleviate the famine. So he could have said, I think we need all stop and pray.
Sure.
Thirdly, he could have said, let's stop this building project until we can kind of all get back on our feet so that we can get income back up. And so out of all of those, he doesn't address any of them except for the one where he says people are getting taken advantage of. And he essentially, I would say, what he's pointing to is this is the very occasion where love is going to shine through. Because he says the people around us are taunting us by how we're treating each other.
Yeah.
And so in a difficult time, we start to look like the rest of the folks around us. Instead of, that's the occasion where we could really look unique. We've faced a lot of challenges and we're still loving and prioritizing each other. So this is the opportunity we have. So he doesn't promise to address any of the other issues. And he really emphasizes, he himself personally decided to double down on, I'm going to use my own personal resources to support the church community, the covenant community, people of God at that point. So he really does a great job, I think, of exemplifying what we should think.
Yeah.
I mean, things are tight for whatever the reason might be economically. So I need to make sure other people at church are okay.
So even if you're going to take all those problems away, so say he addresses any of those other problems, in a sense you're taking away the arena in which this particular love is really supposed to exist. So I think that's really helpful when we think about our other problems that are going on. I mean, we've all got a bunch of problems that we'd love to see vanish. Really, if we view them more as opportunities to show a particular kind of love to other church members because of the situations that we're in, rather than just try to remove the situation and remove the opportunity for Christian love. I think that's super.
I think even how we pray falls in that camp. I mean, I'm inclined to pray, God, alleviate the difficulty.
Oh, absolutely.
Not since there's difficulty, help me think about others well. And that's what we're being pointed to.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks. Absolutely. Folks, I hope this was helpful to you all. Christians that are watching, go love your church members well. Hopefully this is an encouragement to you. We hope to see you, or hope for you to see us. We can't see you. Hope you see us next time on Hash It Out.